Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be back. It feels like it has been a bit of a break. I've had the chance to be over at the Meadows and to even meet Pia Malady. So there's been some exciting times in my own recovery and professional journey. But tonight, it's a webinar, and we're focusing on steps 4 to 7, continuing with the 12 steps that we're going to do over the course of this year. So what I will do as we begin this is start to refer to the first 3 steps, because they are the foundation. So for any of you that are joining us for the first time, we're South Pacific Private. We're a treatment centre on the northern beaches of New South Wales and Australia, and our services are confidential, we're professional, and we work with the developmental immaturity model. So tonight I'll be linking, it being a South Pacific Private webinar, the immaturity model to the 12-step fellowship. So we'll be looking at those 2 recoveries that Pia Malady says we need to have, and I'll explain these as we go through. So if you have any questions about us at all, or South Pacific Private, at the end of this webinar there'll be some information and a link to our website. Absolutely, please make contact and reach out. We're here for anyone that's interested in recovery. So as we move on, the focus of our webinar today is looking at steps 4 to 7. So we're going to provide an awareness of the 12 steps in general, specifically 4 to 7, hopefully provide some insights of the positive impact of having the 12-step program in your life, and unravel some of the meaning and significance of each one of these steps. The 12 steps were something put together in hindsight. If you look at the way the steps are written, they're written in a sort of posthumous tense, looking back at we admitted we were powerless, we came to believe, etc., etc. And this was because when Alcoholics Anonymous formed in 1938-39, the fellowship itself, with the founders, after a period of time looked at, well, what's working? What are we actually doing? They'd started with a basis of the Oxford Group 6-step program, and then developed these 12 steps, and I think it has become one of the spiritual phenomenons of our time, that since that time they've grown around the world. Millions of people now work these as spiritual principles in their life, and have been given a way out of what seemed for many folks addictive processes that were leading to jails, institutions, and death. So as we go through and just recap the steps we're going to focus on tonight, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves as step 4. Step 5 is we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6 is we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And step 7 is we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Those are certainly a big order, and they're even bigger when you look at South Pacific's, I suppose, version of this, based on the developmental immaturity model, where we're looking at 2 recoveries. Firstly, when you come into SPP, we know we have to help folks deal with the current unmanageability and crisis they're in, which is usually resulting from the secondary symptoms. It'll be some form of addiction, and as Dr. Patrick Kahn says, if you've got one addiction, due to what we know about neurobiology these days, you've usually got 2 or more. And in actual fact, 87% of people from one of his research studies have 2 or more. And so we know that when people come into SPP, there'll be the one they're probably acutely aware of, but there'll be the other ones that are sort of in a supporting role, or are causing an equal amount of destruction and mightn't be in their awareness just yet. Underneath that is our model suggests that it's the untreated primary symptoms that lead to these secondary symptoms. So therefore, Pia Malady suggests there's 2 recoveries. One is from these symptoms, the disease, and the other is from our immaturity as a result of the trauma. So we're looking at how that trauma impacted our self-esteem, boundaries, reality issues, dependency issues, and moderation issues. I always like to start with whenever we're looking at the program, the how of recovery. In Narcotics Anonymous, they simply say that honesty, openness, and willingness are 3 indispensable spiritual principles. And I think nothing probably relies more heavily on these than the 4th step. It's why it's number 4 and not number 1. We need to have some strength and courage that we probably haven't been able to muster of our own accord, that the first 3 steps give us, and I'll go over those principles in a second. But step 4 is really calling upon us to be honest and go to the depths of some of the things that we probably thought we might even take to our grave. And so to do that, I've got to be honest with me first, then honest with others. And step 4, and in particular step 5, 6, and 7 are asking us then to draw on that relationship with a higher power. And I've put in brackets there. It's a spiritual program, not religious. So some of you might be listening and you've got a strong relationship with a deity that really fits with you, with a strong dogma that you can really align yourself with. For other folks that come into the 12-step fellowships, the God word's a real trigger word. They're either atheist or agnostic as a choice they're making in their adult life, and sometimes it's due to a reaction to growing up and part of their trauma being through a church or a religion. So I like the acronym of good, orderly direction, the God, the G-O-D, and God standing for that. So as long as we're reaching out to something outside of ourselves, we can get some information that's not coming from inside of ourselves. Now, the first 3 steps, as I said, step 4 is really relying on some courage and some strength that initially when we first get to a program we mightn't even have, to be honest. And that honesty will come eventually through the denial, crumbling, and us having a good look at ourselves. But the first step is we admitted that we're powerless and unmanageable. So looking at finally coming to terms with I'm powerless over the things that trigger me around my addiction. I'm powerless over the way my feelings get triggered and the behaviors. Well, once we get that obsession and that compulsion, it feels that we're quite powerless over it, but it's more about the feelings and the thoughts that get triggered. And what we're genuinely powerless over is what triggers the things that are now a genuine trigger. An example of that would be if you were walking down the beach having a lovely day, feeling really strong in your early recovery, and you look down, you're a heroin addict, and here washed up on the beach in this lovely environment is a syringe. And instantly, because it's so close, those neurocircuits just fire up and that parasympathetic nervous system just brings up that very strong emotion, and instantly your state has changed. That's what we're powerless over. But behaviorally, we're not powerless over running off to the dealer's house. We could just as easily promote a behavior towards ringing our sponsor in that moment. From the first step also, you're going to get a clearer picture of what that unmanageability has been like. Whenever we try to be powerful over something we're powerless over, we're going to find evidence of unmanageability. The first step gave us that. Step 2, well, once you admit you're powerless and life's unmanageable, wow, you're in big trouble. Step 1 usually means we're more aware now than ever how much trouble we're in. So step 2 helps us challenge the definition of insanity. We came to believe that a power could restore us to sanity, meaning that by repeatedly making those same mistakes and expecting a different result, I've become more aware of what those actually are. So the step 2 miracle is getting that sanity to see, wow, I'm actually powerless and unmanageable over something that for many years I might have tried to manage and try and be powerful over. Once you get that awareness in step 2, then generally you find there's only one way out. It's either insanity and death, or we go forward into recovery. There's no middle ground. We're either back to addiction or we've got to move forward. Step 3 is just saying I need to take my will and my life and hand that over to God as I understand God. And so it's generally at that time where we've reached out to a power greater than us. And as I said earlier, sometimes instantly someone's praying to Jesus, or they're praying to a deity that really fits for them. For others, this is the beginning of that challenge of trusting maybe a sponsor or a therapist or nature or something that would represent a power greater than them. So the principles that come from those 3 steps is I can't. In the first step, it tells us that principle of honesty says, well, I can't. The second step is a challenge that God can. There's power outside of me. God, good orderly direction, gives us that hope. But hope is nothing if we don't then have the faith to put it into works. You know, faith without works is dead, is a spiritual saying from the Bible. Let God, so I can't, God can, and we have to though let him. We have to surrender. And as I said, the wonderful thing about a spiritual program is that surrender can be made by an atheist, by an agnostic, by someone who has a very particular faith. And it doesn't, you know, one of the wonderful things about a 12-step meeting around a higher power is you get to hear all the diverse ways people put this principle of surrender and their faith in action into their lives. So those three things are really important to move forward into step 4. It's because recovery requires, you know, what's step 3 in action? Well, it requires us giving up those old ways in which you nurtured yourself by living in those extremes. So generally, people, places, and things have to change. Being in recovery, once you make those changes, means we need to. You'll need to see the recovery in action. If change is behavioural, then there's going to be a change in your lifestyle. I'm going to start working the steps by attending meetings, getting a sponsor, being a sponsor. It doesn't take long to have something to give away. Doing service, for example, joining a group, taking on a position, becoming a representative for that group, actively living a healthy lifestyle and in all your affairs. So you're going to start to see recovery in action by the time you work in steps 1, 2, and 3. But the 12 steps mean that we need to continue on. So just having that sense of getting honest, growing some courage, and turning it, you know, having that hope, and then having faith means, well, I need to continue on with the steps to ensure that under stress those old patterns don't return. So that brings us to step 4. So step 4 is a challenge, and it's one of those ones that people balk at. And if you go into a 12-step meeting, you'll see people be afraid to move into step 4. They'll balk at it, they'll put it off, and even when they start it, they can procrastinate for long periods of time. So step 4 is we made a searching and searching and moral inventory of ourselves. I have a hint that we're missing the word fearless there, but I could stand corrected there. So we made this searching and moral inventory of ourselves. The principle we need here is courage. So that third step, and the third step in action is the serenity prayer, one of the most used prayers in 12-step culture. Is God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can. So this courage now, we need to draw on this courage that we've started to grow in early recovery. We've made that decision to give up whatever it is that we're obsessed and compulsed about. We're starting to work these principles. Now we need courage to really look and face ourselves. So if we look at some of the definitions here, so what's a moral? What's moral mean? Well, some of the definitions we have around moral, it's a lesson that can be derived from a story or experience, standards of behavior, principles, right and wrong. And so what we're looking when we're looking at a moral inventory is, well, what lessons do I get from my story? I really like that definition, because when it comes to the next definition, when you've grown up in a family system where the legacy might be addiction, long-term addiction, some of the values we might have can be very distorted. I work with a family where they were a couple, and both their parents had been in long-term addiction and crime, and so the values they had was that stealing was okay, and that if you actually didn't steal from the man, from business, from the shopping centres, that there was something wrong with you. You were being stupid if you didn't take something. I really remember them having to change their values and to grow what a new sense of integrity would be. So the idea of doing a moral inventory is, I got to find out, what are my values? What if I look at my own story, what are some of the values I've had that I've gone against? And for some folks, we've got to get a bit of a handrail around, well, what are values? What are sort of some general consensus values that I might be able to reflect on, and then put my story together with that and see what comes out of that. the definition of searching, it sounds obvious, but if you get a good sponsor, sometimes they'll get you looking up the meaning. So examining carefully and thoroughly, and acutely observant or penetrating, piercing or sharp. I need to look into this. I can't just look on the surface. I've got to have a sense of my own values. I've got to have a sense of the moral part of the inventory, and then I've really got to look into this. We need to look deeply and become that observant. As I said, if you've grown up in a family system where there's lots of cognitive distortions around values, then in the Alcoholics Anonymous 12 by 12, they suggest that, well, one of the ways we can give ourselves a bit of a handrail is, well, let's look at the 7 deadly sins. What we're looking at in in these as a handrail is, well, most folks will have, in regards to it's the human dilemma. We can, if you go through and read the literature, we'll talk about, well, lust or pride or the wrath and resentment and anger, powerlessness altogether, envy or gluttony, greed or sloth. That there'll be elements of these that are just part of the human dilemma. What we're looking for is, in the 4th step is, well, when have I got obsessional with these? When have I acted out with my lust and it's caused me to go outside of my value system? When has my pride got in the way? When has that anger or resentment and wrath been acted out and caused harm? Same with envy, whereas envy affected the way that I've done my relationships or affected my relationship with myself, so on and so forth with the other 7 deadly sins. Because when we come in and if we haven't got a value system that's making sense to us, then these things can be just helpful things to reflect on when we take a deep searching look inside to see, well, how have I acted these things out in my life so far, in the story of my life. Step 4, when we look at the South Pacific private model, the developmental model of immaturity, one of the things when PM Melody says, well, if we look at the untreated primary symptoms, where does our immaturity get acted out? The program gets really clear. In Pia Melody's Breaking Free book, she talks about the inventory, including reflecting on how have I offended the reality of others. Now, reality being their body, their thoughts, their feelings, and their behavior. So how have I acted out and impacted them? And so what you get to journal on is, well, how have I physically offended another person, but either a lack of, from one end of the spectrum, a lack of nurturing, right up to physically abusing somebody? How have I intellectually offended someone, from either withdrawal of intimacy or really overtly determining and telling them what you should think, what you should feel, in particular with the intellectual offences, what you should be thinking, being critical of their thinking, shaming of their thinking. So really looking broadly into how I've offended others. Emotionally, how have I acted my feelings out that have caused an offence to the reality of someone else? Sexual offences to others, and spiritual offences. Now Pia Melody's definition of spiritual abuse is when I've offended someone's entire reality. I've tried to, either through negative control, hold them emotionally hostage, that they have to be a certain way to interact with me. And in particular, up top there, it suggests that we need to look at how have I offended the reality of children and adults. If we have a parental or guardian role in children's lives, then that power imbalance means if I'm acting out, I can really have a spiritually damaging effect on a child's reality, because they haven't got the ability to set boundaries and to determine their reality independently. So with children and adults, we get to look at this inventory and get as much data as we can on not just the 7 deadly sins and the impact of our adult story regarding our addictions, but to look at the way that we have offended others in regards to those primary symptoms that were an impact of the developmental trauma. I suppose in looking at step 4, the the idea of well, what's it mean then if I'm going to sit down and search and into this story in mind? What are some of the tips for doing it? And I found some to be really helpful. Firstly, we've got to make time. If you're doing step 4, it's making sure that you have some time available, because you never really want to do it. You're really going to need to be in your functional adult to write your step 4. No one goes, oh wow, I've got a free hour, let's get that journal out and write a searching and fearless moral inventory into all the stuff that I really hate about myself. No one's going to do that. So it's sort of setting that, well, 3 times a week I'm going to put half an hour aside, and I'm going to work on my step 4. Making sure that you've got a private and comfortable space. You don't want to be doing this in the lounge room or your home with kids running around if you can help it. If that's the only way you can do it, by all means do it. But make sure you're comfortable and that it's private, because at times when we're writing about these things, we can have those feelings come up. And also the solitude, writing this in solitude, not loneliness. I put a post up that Dr. Patrick Carnes had in his Gentle Pathway to the 12 steps the other day. The author is escaping me right now, but he talked about the difference between aloneness and solitude. The 4th step is really taking those first 3 steps into action. I need to be in that solitude to look within. So having a comfortable private space is helpful. Have a good journal. This is something, buy a book for this. Get something that is about that statement of intention, that I'm going to do something important here. And get a journal that's private, that's got nothing else in it, and it's for your step 4. And I suppose most of all, like all writers out there, if you're going to do a writing project, you have to write. So it's if you're doing a step 4, it's not in your head. It's sitting down and putting these thoughts on the paper. For most 12-step fellowships, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, etc., they've got their own 12-step guide. So I know in Narcotics Anonymous, they've got the green and gold guide, where I think it's 75 questions possibly in step 4, where you sit down and you work through them. That can be helpful. So making sure that you've got some form of guidance. When I first got clean and sober 29 years ago, my sponsor gave me 3 headings. There wasn't a step guide, working guide in Narcotics Anonymous. So he said, just write out your life story, which is that first tip that we talked about before, about just the narrative, the definition of searching, and relationships, sex and relationships, and theft and lies. And it was interesting that those 3 subjects gave me so much to write on. It was a very challenging experience. These days, with the fellowship's growing, we've got so many more tools that we can use. So by all means, check out those tools and see if there's a good fit for you. One of the tips that was told to me about writing a step 4, and I didn't believe it when they told me. I thought, oh, that's just extra writing, I'm not going to do that. But write yourself into and out of today. So when you're writing your step 4, it can be helpful to say, well, today I'm 9 months clean, and I went to work, and I've been to a meeting, or I've come home and I've read the 4th step, and you just share a little bit about your day in recovery, just a sentence. And when you write yourself out, when you write yourself back into that day, so you write yourself out of the 4th step back into today. It's 9:30 now. I'm going to be going to bed shortly. Dear God, please, take my will in my life, etc., etc. Whatever works for you, but write yourself back into today. The reason that this tip was given to me years ago was that sometimes when you're writing about old behaviors that you still haven't fully processed, you'll find that you hang on to it. You start to obsess about it. It stays in your head. My first sponsor told me, if you want to know if anyone's doing step 4, go to a steps meeting and they'll be sharing all the time about what they're writing about. And his tip was to write yourself back into today so you can leave your step 4 in the book. When you close the sheet, when you close that book, you can put it away and get on about your recovery, because the steps are both supposed to be tools that are the solution, not this touchstone for the problem. So if that's a helpful tip, please use it. We're as sick as our secrets, so those how principles are really important. Being honest. when you're writing your fourth step, and I got a big slide that says this message in a second, but it's write it like there is no fifth step. Just be honest. You're the only person that's going to see this. Keep it in a safe place. You do not have to share everything you write. So writing everything is your business. So we're sick as our secrets. Write down everything. That would be the suggestion I think so important. It's spiritually, those principles are indispensable: to be honest, to be open, and then we work on the willingness when we get to step 5. But certainly the willingness in regards to step 4 is to do it, to put it down, take a risk. What have you got to lose? Call your sponsor a support person when things get triggered. So it's not uncommon for people to be calling folks as they're writing their fourth step, using that support that you've started to develop early on by going to meetings, getting a sponsor, working the first 3 steps, etc. And when you close that book, hand it over. Work that third step. Hand your will and your life over to a higher power and begin and continue to get on with your day. As I said, here it is. It's write that fourth step like there's not a fifth step. Just write it as though it's that chance to be fearless and thorough and finally go to the depths. I know at SPP we get folks to write their first step here, and I had a fellow recently come in concerned. He didn't know if he wanted to put some things into his first step, and I said, absolutely not. Don't put it into your first step. The first step's to give you the evidence that you're powerless and life's become unmanageable. There's some things we need to save for that fourth step. Put it into that fourth step, and it might be, as we talk about the fifth step when we do get to it, that you share it with a sponsor or you take it somewhere else. But write it, at least write it out, so you're getting it out, bringing it up. You're really working that fourth step. You're being fearless, you're being thorough, and you're really taking that searching and piercing look within. So once we get to step 4 and we've got it written, the last thing you want to do is sit on it, and some people do. At every step that we take, we run that risk of hanging on to it, procrastinating and getting afraid and sort of backtracking through the steps. So I remember hearing it said once that recovery is like pushing a ball uphill. We're either pushing it uphill or it's rolling back down. So step 5 says we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So this is an interesting step. The principle that we get from this step is integrity. Finally, I'm being in my reality, I'm aware of my reality, and I'm sharing and owning my reality, not just with someone else, but with that spiritual power, or the God as I understand God. And we're not only just looking for what we did, we're looking for, well, what's the exact nature of that wrong? There's our wrong, and I remember hearing it explained once that if I lied to another person, well, the wrong would be lying. I need to admit, well, I was dishonest. But the exact nature of that wrong might have been shame, that I had toxic shame about that mistake. And so I'll be writing when I'm doing and sharing that not only was it dishonest, but underlying the exact nature of the wrong is that I felt shame about a certain issue that I didn't want to be open about, and that so I chose to keep it secret, be out of my integrity, and both those things combined had that impact on that other human being. So let's look at step 5 and some of the things in it. AA, in their 12 by 12 resource for the 12 steps, says all of AA's 12 steps ask us to go contrary to our natural desires. They all deflate our egos. When it comes to ego deflation, few steps are harder to take than step 5. But scarcely any step is more necessary to long-time sobriety and peace of mind than this one. They do certainly talk about it being the one that separates people that are really wanting to be in this fellowship and who are just sort of sitting on the fence. This is the one that really says, well, I'm in. I need to take all 12 steps in order to recover. And I'm going to take that risk and commit to this because I want recovery long term. This isn't just a Band-Aid solution. I know I need to take this forward. So some of the things that you'll see in the literature that can, well, how do we get this courage, especially if you've never seen these steps before, why would you trust them? And like all steps, I think it's really valuable when you're a 12 stepper to go to a steps meeting, add it to your schedule, because the steps meeting is where you're going to hear the people that have done the step before you share about their experience, strength, and hope. I found a lot of benefit in that because I'd never done them before. I didn't know what a step 4 was going to do to me, but I knew that I had lots of secrets, and so it was helpful. So some of the things in the literature, this step is the key to our freedom. Sharing the exact nature of our wrongs gives us freedom to live. So not only that, freedom from what? Well, freedom from my addiction, and freedom, as they say in AA, from the bondage of self. That would be what I would understand with Pia Melody's immaturity with the primary symptom is when I'm in my wounded child, adult, adapted child, and living in those extremes, I'm not free to live. I'm stuck in that extreme sort of dichotomy of those two ways, the less than, better than, good and bad, trying to, too vulnerable, invulnerable, etc. So this is a chance that by sharing this exact nature, I get to start to understand it, and I get conscious of it, and I can make different choices. Excuse me. Completing the 5th step can be a turning point in your recovery. The first 3 steps then therefore take on a new meaning. I think once you start to become aware of those defects of character, how we've injured others, and we're not making excuses anymore, we're not blaming anybody else anymore, we're really taking responsibility, then those first 3 steps, how they take on a new meaning sometimes is we can see the insanity finally clearer than ever, and that we can have some healthy fear about the return of that sanity. So it really gets us working that 3rd step on a daily basis. The listener is both a consultant and a witness, sharing some of their own story along the way. It was very helpful to me when I did my 4th step. I've done, I think, if I think about it now, probably 5. I've done 3 different fellowships when I've done a 5th step and sharing my 4th step. It was helpful to me that your sponsor, I've always done it with a sponsor, they're not your therapist. So they're going to share their own experience, strength, and hope. And I felt really grateful for that. I felt that I wasn't as sick as my secrets when I heard other people own and share the things that they felt shame about, the things that they did, and the things that they needed to share in their 5th step. So the getting them to sort of witness that and just be present, but then also share some of their own story was really valuable. And another way that'll come out, I'll talk about it in the second when we get to step 6, is the value of that is they also, because they've looked for their defects out of a step 4 and 5, start to take a list for you because they know what they're looking for, and I'll talk about that shortly. So the 4th and 5th steps teach us the importance of engaging our feelings. It's probably the first time we've turned and faced our story like just full on and chosen not to hide. And so feelings come up. For sometimes it's the first time they have a big feeling. It's interesting because even just journaling and writing, when you write your step, you can probably have a sense you're feeling something. But there is, I think, that moment when you're sharing a 5th step with someone that makes it so much realer to sort of look at someone's sort of nervous system looking back at you, the empathy in their eyes, and all of a sudden it gives us that permission to drop sometimes into a much deeper place than we've ever dropped before. And unexamined feelings feed our addiction. So it's that chance that if I can touch that vulnerability and start to have these feelings of shame and guilt, then and start to release those and own those, then by examining them and really connecting them to those experiences, I get a chance to not have them drive my addiction. And those references were from Patrick Carnes' Gentle Path and the Narcotics Anonymous Basic Text. So as we move on, it's step 5, tips. So I suppose some of the tips are generally doing it with the sponsor and the program you're in is really valuable. So by now you know them, you've trusted them, you've generally rung them about some life issues, and they've steered you towards the steps. You might have formally worked the steps, the step working guides that start from step 1. So you've hopefully worked those first 3 steps, developed some trust, and they have a sense of you and you have a sense of them. So when you move on to make a time to do your 4th step, you'll still be nervous, because if you've got a pulse, you're going to be nervous. You're really sharing yourself at depth, deeper than you probably have before. So it's okay to have that nerves. It's essential you have those nerves, really. It means it's valuable to you. This is real. So make a time and you stick to that time. And in some cases, if you've written a long inventory, it might take several times. This isn't meant to be a 12-hour marathon. You might do it over 3 or 4 times. It's a journey, not a destination. It's not really. There's no real value in having some torturously long experience. You'll set the time, give it the time it takes, so you can process it and let it sort of sit inside you, so it's going to make some sense. So if you want to really be present and have the presence of a sponsor, doing it in 3-4 hour blocks or having some good breaks is really helpful. And the other thing is this: the step 5 is we're inviting God into this process. So if you're atheist or agnostic, it might be more about a statement of intention or a mindfulness state that you're trying to get into. But if you've got a particular deity or belief system, then it might be absolutely praying for Jesus to be present, or the God of your understanding to be present. And so some of the symbols that might help you be mindful of that: a candle burning between you, a prayer at the beginning and end, or some sort of statement of intention can be really helpful. Some sponsors, in the process of listening and being that witness and confidant, will start to write down the defects of character that they're hearing as you share. And this can be used as the beginning of your 6th step. Really can be helpful. So not all sponsors do that. I've done it with sponsors that have and sponsors that haven't. The first sponsor just listened and at the end basically said, there's nothing in there I haven't really done. I thought about doing myself, and that was helpful for the first one. But as I got on in recovery and really wanted to know the exact nature of these defects, the character, having someone give me that list to say, well, look, this is what we'll start working on when we get to step 6 was helpful. Some people, because they use their step 4 in their step 6, they hold on to it. Some people like to release it. And I've heard stories of folks that they put it through the shredder. They like to take it outside and burn it with their sponsor and say a prayer. I think it really is up to you and up to the belief system. It needs to be valuable to you. So these are the things you get to discuss with your sponsor and discuss what would feel good for you to do. And I think there's some real freedom in that to sort of create an experience that's meaningful for you. For some of us, there's going to be some things in our 4th step that are incriminating and that could create a legal issue if you share it with a sponsor, because they've got mandatory reporting, and you might need to find a priest or somebody that you would share it with, a sponsor, where you let them know there'll be things in here that are going to be pretty impacting to hear, and keep yourself safe. So seeking out a priest to share some things could be really important, and I've heard people doing that in their recovery. Again, speak to your sponsor about that. I think in general, no matter what your belief, this is sacred time. This is you coming together, sharing your heart and soul with another human being, and it's a sacred moment and deserves to be honored. So here we are. We've got step. We've taken the time. We've been searching and fearless. We've looked into deeply into ourselves. We've taken a risk. We've shared it with someone else. We've begun to collect the exact nature of our wrongs. What were these underlying defects of character? And so that brings us to step 6. You can't collect that information and say, I'm done. Step 6 is really getting us to look at, well, what are these? We were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. The principle here is willingness, and it's interesting because the word entirely is one that how do we get entirely ready? And I think that definitely comes from that experience of doing a 4 and a 5. It's easy to be laissez-faire about it when we've got it at arm's length, and we're in our minimizing and denial and delusion about the the impact of our behaviors, and especially when it comes to the impact regarding our developmental immaturity. If I'm in my minimization, denial, and delusion, I can have a lot of cognitive distortions where I just blame everybody else. And so step 4 and step 5, usually that's where we even see that impact on others. So becoming entirely ready, it really helps to get this data. Now, what are we looking for when it comes to defects? Some of the definitions: it's a shortcoming, a fault, an imperfection, a defect in an argument, a defect in a machine. We're just looking for that fault, lack or want, especially with something essential to perfection or completeness. And I really like that idea about there's something in there that's a lack regarding my sense of completeness, because in recovery we certainly talk about having that hole within. It's a God-shaped hole. You'll hear it said in 12-step meetings, and there's something missing, that spiritual dilemma that I think Pia Mellody certainly sums up by saying that when we've been impacted developmentally, we learn to adapt and we survive, but we don't thrive. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about what happens when we come from that disconnection to connection. So defects can be a failure, a defect, a deficiency in conduct or condition, thought or ability, a social shortcoming, a shortcoming of philosophy, a belief system. So we're starting to now really delve into, well, what were the exact nature of these wrongs? What were some of our defects in our character? Now, in the Breaking Free resource of Pia Mellody's, the workbook that goes with Facing Codependence, which is what our Life Skills 2 program is based on, is really confronting when you get to step 6. I've been in recovery for a long time. I've used that resource before in the past, but when I started running Life Skills 2 here and put that program together, I was even challenged myself when I looked at everything that Pia Mellody looks at to get you to see, well, how do I impact and offend someone else's state in their reality with these particular things? And as you can see, there's a lot of them, and for every one of these she gets you to write on it. How has my resentments impacted my relationships, my perfectionism, my need to strive for power, overcommitment? How's my physical and mental illness impacted the reality of others? Have I tolerated sexual abuse? Have I had a personal loss of morality, and how's that impacted myself and others? Blaming others for my reality, my body, my thoughts, my feelings, my behavior. Taking responsibility for the reality of others. Indecisiveness, pushing others to be your higher power. Having a lack of passion in your life. Expressing feelings explosively, controlling the reality of others, so that negative control issues relationally, lying or being dishonest and coming from a state of shame, unworthiness. How's my helplessness affected and be offensive to others? Shutting others out, inappropriate social behaviours, irresponsibility, inadequate or unfulfilling sex life. How's that impacted others? How have I blamed others for my financial issues? Extreme problem solving, lack of intimacy, scorekeeping, jealousy, self-centeredness, insisting people have the same value system as us so we can be safe, again, negative control, and arguing about facts or having to always be right. So if that list, just hearing me say it's sort of overwhelming, I understand. I remember when I first saw it, I just thought, wow, I'm not sure about these guys I'm trying to help here. I need to look at some of these things myself. And I was just really impressed with just how deep Pia Mellody took this step 6, that these are the defects. This is the sort of things that really interrupt with me being in my vulnerability and the impact it has on the relationships in my life with myself and with others. So in regards to primary symptoms, it's very deep. But once you do this writing, it's really hard to go back to being unconscious about these, to go back in that Johari's window to having a blind spot about it. And I think the idea of the steps is it heads us towards, as it says in step 12, a spiritual awakening, or an awakening within. We become alive. It's that becoming conscious about those things that we were unconscious about, that Carl Jung says is essential, so it doesn't direct our life and we don't feel like we're a victim to it. So the breaking free, or if any of those things make sense, if you've heard me go through those and you're thinking, oh my God, that's me, that those things are really causing me some stress, please check us out about Life Skills 2, and if you're not close to SPP and able to access that program, please seek out Breaking Free. It's amazing how good that book can be. So when we're looking for defects of character, we're looking for the impact. How have they impacted ourselves? If we've done a step 4 with our sponsor that's looking at taking the defects we found in step 4, even around our 7 deadly sins, how have they affected us? We're now in step 6, becoming entirely ready. So writing about them, getting clear about them, seeing the impact they have on others is how we get entirely ready. Because for a while, there'll be some defects you don't want to give up. You might love a little bit of resentment and how it makes you feel all powerful, and you might like a bit of righteousness, or you might like to act out your lusts for a while. And so it's getting that information, so when something is starting to have a negative impact, we can look at it clearly, and that clearness helps us break that insanity about repeating that same mistake and expecting a different result. And it's getting clear that this is something I need to eventually move on to step 7. The other part of step 6, though, when we do a moral inventory, what we're also looking for is what parts of our life do we do well. So when we're looking for the parts of our character, well, what are some of the assets that I have, and what are some of the assets that I already have active, but I struggle to use sometimes when I'm acting out in the defect. And if I've also observed that I've come from a family system where I probably need to develop some assets, then for every defect, there'll be a spiritual principle or an asset that we can, once we've identified the defect, start to pray and start to develop that asset in our life. So what a sponsor can help us with when we start to do some writing on steps 6, once we've identified the defect, is what would be the opposing asset that we could focus on developing. So when we're looking at this step, we're also listing what are the assets I've identified when I've written my step 4 and shared in step 5. What are some of the assets my sponsor might need to? Sometimes we need that support from outside to get clear on what they are. And so we're looking at what are the ones we already have that we need to work on, and what are some we need to develop. And so that will, when we get to step 7, that gets helpful, because we can pray not only for the removal of defects of character, but we're also wanting to work on and pray and put our efforts into the solution. What are some of the assets we need to develop? So tips for affirmations. Once we work out, well, there's things I need to start to work on, that my defects of character are showing me I have a deficiency in, then I need to get an affirmation to sort of grow those assets, because those neurons that fire together wire together. So if I notice that I'm constantly dishonest, even when I don't need to lie. If I've grown up in the family system where it wasn't okay to have my reality, I've learned to be dishonest about my reality, then the asset I'm trying to pray for is honesty. So I might need to have an affirmation that just for today, I'm going to be honest in all of my affairs, or just for today, I'm going to be honest in my relationship with others. And so starting to do some writing about that, getting in touch with that, getting those neurons firing. Some of the ways to do it: write it in your journal. You might write affirmations out. I remember for a while there, and this might seem crazy, but I've known people to put affirmations for self on their vanity mirror at home, in their bathroom, or in their dressing table in their bedroom. Sometimes we need, say, rage is an issue for folks, and you road rage, then you might want a little post-it note right on your dashboard of your car to remind you of a positive message towards growing that asset. And one of the things that Pia Melody shares in Breaking Free around self-esteem is putting messages on your phone in your own voice and replaying them back to yourself as a bit of a meditation. And I remember I've got a fantastic inner skeptic, and I remember reading that and thinking, oh, no one's going to do this in the group that I was facilitating. And I was amazed that that week so many people were able to come back to me and saying, wow, hearing affirmations in my own voice, I even changed them. I found it hard to do. Even the process of putting it together was really exciting to hear people share about it, because they were it was like that functional adult was really reparenting those inner children. So yeah, don't be afraid to start to put some of those affirmations to self on your iPhone and listen to them back as a mindfulness exercise. So it's important that we focus on the asset and not just the defect, but we're as sick as our secret. So it's getting really clear about the defect, the exact nature of the wrong is important as well. So we're getting to the business end of this deal. Once you've done a step 4, you've been fearless and thorough, and you've looked at that exact nature, you've shared it with someone else, and they've started that work of helping you to tease out the defects, tease out the assets, then what do we do with it? So the 12 steps are really clear. They talk about, well, we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. So that higher power, depending on the fellowship, I've used a lot of the wording from the Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you go to Codependence Anonymous, they'll be saying we humbly ask God. For any atheists or agnostics out there, please, that's good orderly direction, whatever is that power that you're drawing on, even if it's your higher consciousness or the relationship with your sponsor. So we humbly ask them to be removed. The principle here is humility. And so that the humility is that, well, it's knowing my assets and my liabilities. So my assets, I'm growing, I'm using the affirmations, but I really need to ask that power greater than me to release me, to remove these shortcomings. The definition of humbly is to be not proud or arrogant, not too modest, having a feeling of insignificance, inferiority, of subservience. I really think that worthlessness, that toxic shame as a result of these behaviors and defects in action for a long period of time in our life, that was built off this developmental immaturity, means that we can feel really inferior and insignificant to others, and that we can feel low in rank, that wounded child, less than, bad and flawed. But also there's the balancing, the idea of humbly, that it's a good experience of our assets and liabilities, means that courteously respectful as part of a definition for this is interesting. I still need to become aware of these things that are causing me harm and my overcommitment to them, but also need to know that they balance out with some of the assets I've either got or need to develop. So if we keep moving on, the idea of step 7, some of the literature, one of the things I've always liked about the 12 by 12 in AA, it says, until he so humbles himself, his recovery will be precarious, if any. It's old language and it's referring to the masculine, but until I humble myself, until I really do this work and then become aware that these defects of character left to my own esteem are unlikely to be removed, then I got this step is the real, it's another linchpin. Every step's a linchpin to the next step. So it's I don't want to risk my recovery by not being humble and asking for these to be removed. So that the gift of humility is that I get released from this. Step 7 is similar to step 3 in a sense that we're handing our will and our life over, but as Pia Melody says in Breaking Free, we've got more data now. I know specific, please, instead of saying, oh, look, take my will and my life, I'm saying, dear Lord, please relieve me of my lust, or please relieve me of my gluttony. We're asking for something quite specific. Relieve me of my dishonesty, etc., etc. So we've got that data now. We're getting much more specific. Step 6 helps us become intimately aware of our defects and the exact nature of those wrongs. So when that awareness helps us to become entirely ready to ask for these things to be removed. And a thing that I've always liked about recovery, when the pain of remaining the same becomes more than the fear of change, we let go. And I do believe that the work we do in step 4, really confirming it in step 5, getting really clear what's the exact nature of the wrongs in step 6, leads us to that acute awareness that we will finally be in touch with some of those deeper feelings, and it's that pain of staying the same and going backwards that becomes greater than that fear of going forward. And people make that decision in step 7 to say, I can't handle these things on our own anymore. If I could share one thing about that, I remember when I got clean, that was a challenge, there's no doubt. But I had enough evidence. I was ready. I was over it. I was frightened, but I was ready. But when I hit rage, I remember about 2.5 years clean. Relationally, I was married. I had no awareness of the impact of my childhood trauma. I was in a very unconscious relationship with someone who was really working their program really hard. I was working my program really hard, but relationally, the stress we were under unconsciously was enormous. My partner had rage issues, and she would get overwhelmed into a real state of fight. She'd smash everything, and I remember finding that incredibly overwhelming. And the rage that would come out in the two of us was inexplicable to us. And this is way before Dr. Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory and the wonderful knowledge that we have today with Dr. Alan Shaw or Dan Siegel, etc., etc. We were flying by the seat of our pants. And I remember all we had was the 12 steps. And I worked this one with my sponsor, and I just knew that the rage was bigger than I can handle. And praying for that to be removed, I had genuine fear that God got me clean, but I really had fear that these defects that felt so big and so overwhelming could be removed. But I had no other avenue. So I prayed. I remember my sponsor coming over, and I shared. I was in a lot of pain, and so I just moved through that fear of change and just prayed with him for it to be removed. I started working on the rage. I started going to counseling because that was the third step in action. It was like, well, I need support, and that was when the world opened up. I found a therapist that knew this model, and from there on, the awareness. I finally went from unconsciousness to consciousness. In Pia's language, I went from disconnection to connection, and that putting that third step in action through the 7th step opened me up to the change and the removal of that defect at that level that I thought was never going to be able to happen, never going to happen in my own life. So step 7 is we get to draw on the power of those first 3 steps. We're asking that God that we handed daily our will and our life over to please remove this shortcoming. It's where sanity is now replacing insanity. The gift of step 2 is finally, I'm not going to continue to repeat this same mistake expecting a different result. If I was raging in a relationship, I'm finally saying, God, please remove me of this rage. It's not serving me any longer. So that gift of sanity. We see the damage of our defects finally, and the untreated underlying symptoms that have caused this damage. So we finally get that at depth, the exact nature, and we get aware of the impact of our wrongs. And the willingness allows ourselves to feel the shame and guilt that helps us become entirely ready to hand over our will and our lives to the care of God in relation to these. When I'm in my immaturity and I'm in blame, I'm not accessing my healthy shame and guilt. If I've come from the impact of developmental trauma and have a lot of immaturity in the way I do relationship, I've disconnected from my shame and guilt. Or I experience it at a toxic level, toxic guilt and the isolating effect that has, or toxic shame and the worthlessness that really shuts me down. So if I start to now finally feel healthy shame and guilt, that vulnerability is what allows me to get back to that core of self. I nearly didn't put this slide in because it's such an overwhelming thing to look at, but to be honest, the overwhelm in it just simply sums up what we're talking about. The syndromes of shame, if you just look at the top of this slide and go down the headings towards the center. The syndromes of shame, the secondary symptoms, the sex, the alcohol, the drugs, the food, and the either the addictions that we have or the lack of moderation that we have around these issues. When we take those out of the picture, we get to those behavioral cover-ups, those defense mechanisms, and both of those two outer rings are where we can really, in step 4 and 5, see the damage they've caused others and ourselves. The family system roles, and when we go into those roles and we're not being authentic and have that offensive act and damage our relationships with self and others. And when we finally start to get through those denials, those ego defenses, we get to that shame, and that's what gets released when we share 4 and 5. And then from there, we start to see the real impact of those outer rings on others, and we're asking those to be removed, so we get to that core of self that's underneath that toxic shame. Now, when Pia Mellody talked about this, she talked about it as, if I can get back to that core of self, my inherent worth, my divine birthright, I actually open myself up then for a relationship with God as I understand God. And from there, I'm back in relationship with the true me. I'm growing my maturity, I'm living in moderation, I'm valuing myself, setting boundaries, taking responsibility, being aware of my needs and wants and meeting them more moderately. So this journey through this recovery map means I'm on my way back home, and back to if you've got a spiritual belief system, it will be that it's the major building blocks to that spiritual awakening at depth. So the journey continues for us. It's that disconnection to connection, the doorway back to that connection through the wound, through that toxic shame. These steps really help us with that. It's courage that we need, so we draw on that strength from a higher power. That shame reduction allows us to experience ourself, finally, our deep self, for who we are, the good and the bad, the perfectly imperfect. And we no longer need to be terminally unique. We surrender ourselves. For some folks that are shame bound, we're releasing that shame. And for other folks that feel that this step doesn't apply, and we finally do this work and we see that we do impact others, we realize that we don't have to be terminally different anymore, that pride doesn't have to get in the way, that we can just be perfectly imperfect, another human being, garden variety, special in our own needs, on our way to recovery. So now we've faced and shared our past, we become aware of our defects, and we become willing to have them removed to now focus on our assets. We are ready to continue in our pathway through the steps. So we're ready for steps 8 and 9 and 10. Before the end of this year, I'll be putting those 3 steps together. There's a saying in recovery, please, don't stop before the miracle happens. A lot of folks balk at these steps. They really are the business end of the deal. But the gift that can come from finally taking that risk is getting your life back. I suppose there's an opportunity here if anyone wanted to type in a question, or if for you folks that are watching this live, by all means now if you type through a question, I'm happy to just give it a moment. And in summation, these steps are challenging, there's no doubt, but generally the people that make it to 12-step fellowships are ones that have really recognized that I can't keep living the way that I'm living. And if you've made it to SPP or to our program, then we have really acknowledged that we do not just look at those secondary symptoms, we look at the underlying issues. And I do believe, and it's been I had a chance tonight to share it with someone who is just finding this program, and they're in that duality of being really excited they finally found something that they like, and yet they feel overwhelmed with the reality of what that means. So these steps just make it possible for us to do something on a daily basis to work towards the solution. So The last slide here is just simply our contact information. There's certainly my email there. We've got our, if you're on Facebook out there, our Pacific Recovery Facebook site allows you to stay in contact with others in our alumni and see posts, and it gives you a chance to be involved. Please look up our website for any programs that we have. And if you've got any questions either to me personally, or you've got any suggestions about webinars you'd like in the future, please send me an email here at that email address. This will be, like all our webinars, added to our website so you can listen to it again if you need to, or if you've heard something you like and you want to tell a friend about it, please get them to tune in there. And I suppose thank you very much for being part of this and listening to it. And I've always thought you've got to teach what you know. I've had a lot of, I'm not going to say fun putting this together because it's always a challenge, but I'm very grateful for my own recovery, and bye for now.